5.2, we're going to move on to the third type of factoring. So far we've had greatest common factoring that you do all the time, factoring by grouping that you do when there's 4 terms, and now we're moving on to factoring trinomials using what's called the AC method. So this is used when there are 3 terms in the polynomial. So how to factor a trinomial using the AC method? Step number 1, always the same, which is greatest common factor. So if you look at this expression, we've got a 2, an 18, and a 40. So the greatest common factor is a 2. So we write the 2 out front. We're left with a squared plus 9a plus 20. Now here's the part that makes it the AC method. So what you do is you take the coefficient on a and you take the constant c and you multiply them together. So the coefficient on a is a 1. And so we've got 1 times 20 is 20. This is our target. This is the AC method because you multiply A by C and you get your target number. Now, you're trying to find pairs of number whose product is positive 20, and then you're going to choose the pair whose sum is the middle term, which is B. So here we go. Numbers that have a product of positive 20 are positive 1 and positive 20, negative 1 and negative 20, positive 2 and positive 10, negative 2 and negative 10, positive 4 and positive 5, and negative 4 and negative 5. So these are all the potential numbers that multiply to give you 20. But you're trying to find the ones that have a sum of 9. So if you chose 1 and 20, that makes 21. If you chose negative 1 and negative 20, that makes negative 21. 2 and 10, that makes 12. Negative 2 and 10, negative 12. 4 and 5 makes 9. Or negative 4 and negative 5 makes negative 9. We want the sum to be positive 9 and the product to be 20. So we're going to choose 4 and 5. Now here's where I've heard this term or this method called the decomposition method. So depending upon the textbook, different textbooks have different names for things. So this textbook calls it the AC method because that's how you find your target number. But then some people call it the decomposition because step 4 is you're going to split that middle term up into the 2 terms that will add to give you 9a, but then the coefficients will multiply to give you 20. So you've decomposed the middle term into positive 4a and positive 5a, and it doesn't matter which order you write them in, it will work. And now we're reverting to 5.1, objective 2. We have 4 terms, so we're going to factor these by grouping. So you can see here I've grouped them. We've got a squared and 4a, and we've got 5a and 20. Out of this first group, I can greatest common factor out an a to be left with a plus 4. Out of the second group, I can factor out a 5, a positive 5, to be left with a plus 4. You'll know you've done it right because you'll be left with a binomial that has a greatest common factor of a plus 4. So you're going to factor out that a plus 4, and you're going to be left with the 2 out front, the a plus 4 that we factored out, and then an a plus 5 that we're left with. And if I multiplied this back out, I would end up with 2a squared plus 18a plus 40. So that's the whole process, but let's go slow. So I've chosen these 3 questions on purpose, and we're going to go and we're going to work them out. So this one has a coefficient of a of 1. So first I'm going to do is AC. I'm going to find my target number. So I'm looking for numbers that have a product of 6. So this could be 1 times 6, or negative 1 times negative 6. It could be 2 times 3, or it could be negative 2 times negative 3. Because I'm multiplying to get positive 6, they have to have the same sign. Then I'm trying to figure out which pair of numbers has a sum of 5. Well, 1 and 6 makes 7. Negative 1 and negative 6 makes negative 7. So it's not either of these. Then 2 and 3 make 5, and I can stop there. But negative 2 and negative 3 make negative 5. But I'm going to not choose that one, but this guy worked. So I'm going to decompose that middle term. I'm going to rewrite my trinomial with x squared. Then I'm going to break 5x up into positive 2x and positive 3x. And then I'm going to put the plus 6 on the end. Then I'm going to factor by grouping. I'll do it the proper way. I know I didn't in the last video. But here's my one group, and here's my second group. Out of this first group, I'm going to pull out an x to be left with x plus 2. Out of the second group, I'm going to greatest common factor out of 3 to be left with x plus 2. You'll know you did it right because you'll have this binomial and the common factor will be x plus 2. So I'm going to factor out the x plus 2 and I'm left with x plus 3. Okay, let's do this again. So I've got my A, I've got my C. So 2 times 3 is 6 again. So I have the same target number and I have the same middle number that I want to get. So for both of these examples, my target number was 6 and I was trying to get a sum of 5. So I'm going to choose these two again. The only difference is I've got 2x squared plus, and we'll do plus 2x plus 3x plus 3. So all you've done between step like this line and this line is you've broken the 5x up. You've decomposed it. And now I'm going to factor by grouping. So this is one group, this is the other group. And so out of this first group, I'm going to greatest common factor out of 2 and an x. And I'll be left with x plus 1. Out of the second group, I'm going to greatest common factor out of 3. And I'll be left with x plus 1. I'm left with a binomial with a common factor of x plus 1 and 2x plus 3. So these two questions are similar in that they had the same AC target, but they had a different, and the same middle number to decompose, but the difference was this one had a 1 in front and this one had a 2 in front. And what I want you to notice, if you've been factoring for a while only, is that when it was a 1 in front, those two numbers that we chose, this 2 and this 3, ended up being in the brackets. And if I multiply this back out, I'd get x squared, and then I'd have 2x plus 3x is 5x, and 2 times 3 is 6. I could have done this one in one step. This one, you'll notice that I got x plus 1 and 2x plus 3 because of the 2 out front, and I had to do this whole method. So those of you who've been factoring for a while only, I want you to notice when the coefficient is a 1, you can jump right from here down to the last step if you want. But when the coefficient isn't 1, you have to go through the whole method and then you get your answer. So those of you who are just new to factoring, just always do all the work. It's all the same. Those of you who've been factoring for a while, maybe you'll start noticing that when the 1 is in front, you can go straight to the answer. But totally up to you. I'm going to always do it with all the steps just because that's where the majority of people will be. So let's try another 2. So you could pause the video and give this one a go. So we're still looking at AC, which for this one is -6. So I'm looking for numbers that have a product of -6. So that could be -1 and +6. It could be +1 and -6. It could be -2 and +3, or +2 and -3. Now we're looking for the pair that has a sum of 5. So -1 and 6 has a sum of 5. I could stop, but just to show you, this one would have a sum of -5, this would have a sum of 1, and this would have a sum of -1. So this is the one I'm going to choose. So I'm going to factor by decomposition. I'm going to break that 5x term up into -1x plus 6x minus 6. So make sure, double check for yourself, because this is the #1 place people make mistakes, is they choose the wrong numbers. Make sure that these add to give you that. Just quick. Just do a quick glance and be like, -1 plus 6, is that 5? Yeah, okay, I'm good. Then you're going to factor by grouping. So again, I just underline. So I'm going to take an x out of the first group, and I'm left with x minus 1. I'm going to take a 6 out of the second group, and I'm left with x minus 1. And then I have a binomial with a common factor of x minus 1, and I'm left with x plus 6. All right, this one again, we're going to do AC, same target number, same sum. So it's going to be this combo again. So this one, I'm going to write 2x squared. I'm going to go minus x plus 6x minus 3. Then I'm going to factor by grouping. So out of the first group, I'm going to take an x. So I'm left with 2x minus 1. Out of the second group, I'm going to take a 3. And I'm left with 2x minus 1. So my greatest common factor for this binomial is 2x minus 1. And I'm left with x plus 3. And that's factoring a trinomial. It's the same every single time, unless you're someone who's looking for a shortcut, in which case, when there's a 1 in front, you can jump to the final step, but you can't when there's a 2. Okay, there are other methods of factoring trinomials. If you Google, you can find different ways people have done it. Some people just go for it. They're like, okay, the only two numbers I can multiply to give me 2x are x and x. And then they look for numbers that multiply by 3, and then they trial and error them in here. So this method is in your textbook, and it's called trial and error, and it's literally just trying different numbers until you find something that gives you this combination. I find that to do that takes way more time than just doing the steps, which is why I teach the AC method. But there's also other methods on the internet, so feel free, if this isn't working for you, to look up other stuff. But this is the only way that I'll teach to factor a trinomial. So let's do some more. First step, multiply a by c and you get 15. Oh, that went weird. 15. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to give me 15 and add to give me 8. So I've got 1 and 15, but that gives me 16. Negative 1 and negative 15 are going to give me negative 16, so I won't try it, or negative 1 and negative 15. Then I'm going to try 3 and 5. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 plus 5 is 8. So I'm going to break up that middle term into 3x and 5x. And again, it doesn't matter what order you put them in, it will work. And then we're going to factor by grouping. Out of the first group, I'm going to take a 3x. I'm left with x plus 1. Out of the second group, I'm going to take a 5, and I'm left with x plus 1. I knew I did it right because each binomial has, or each term in the binomial has a common factor of x plus 1, and I'm left with 3x plus 5. All right, so let's look at the next one. So now we're going to put in some different twists. The different twist in this one, I hope you notice, is that there's this y on the end, so a y and a y squared. All that means is that your answer is going to have an x at the front and a y at the back. Because when you multiply it, you get x times x is x squared. Your outers and your inners are going to have xy, and then your lasts are going to have a y squared. So the process is the same. So you go 1 times negative 20 is negative 20, so that's my target number. Now I'm looking for the two numbers that multiply to give me negative 20 and add to give me 8. So I've got positive 1 and negative 20, that's negative 19. I could do negative 1 and positive 20, but that's positive 19. I could try negative 2 and positive 10, and there we go, I've got 8. So I'm going to split this up. I've got x squared, I've got minus 2xy, plus 10xy minus 20y squared. So whatever the variables are in the middle term, you just break it up and keep those variables. And then we're going to factor by grouping. So out of this first group, I can take an x. I'm left with x minus 2y. Out of the second group, I can take a 10y. And I'd be left with an x and a minus 2y. I'll know I did it right because I'm left with a binomial with a common factor of x minus 2y, and then I'm left with x plus 10y. All right, if I wanted to check that, I could multiply back through and make sure that it worked out. All right, 2 more, and then you're going to go and practice these. So step number 1, now I didn't say this with the last 2, but I noticed right away that there's a greatest common factor. So whenever you approach a question, you should always try to greatest common factor first. It will work if you don't, but you'll have to greatest common factor in the end, and then that just gets complicated. So I'm going to take that 2 out to be left with x squared minus 9x minus 22. And now I'm going to factor that. So 1 times negative 22 is negative 22. I could have positive 1 and negative 22, but that gives me negative 21. If I did negative 1 and positive 22, that just gives me positive 21. Then I'm going to try, 11 and 2? So 2 and negative 11 give me negative 9. There we go. So I'm going to decompose that middle term into positive 2x and negative 11x minus 22. And then I'm going to factor by grouping. So there's my first group, there's my second group. Out of the first group, I'm going to pull out an x. So I'm going to change this to square bracket. If you don't, that's fine. I'm going to pull out an x. I'd be left with x plus 2. Second group, the first term, finally, I was waiting for an example like this, has a negative. So take out negative 11. And then I'm left with x plus 2. And then I'm left with a binomial that has a common factor of x plus 2, and I'm left with x minus 11. All right, Maybe you're ready to try one on your own. Maybe you just want to watch one more. Totally up to you. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is greatest common factor. I can take out a 4. So I'm going to write that 4 out front. I'm left with 4x squared plus 8xy minus 5y squared. So I got to pull out my target number. My target number is -20. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me -20 and add to give me 10. Now maybe I've stopped listing them all. Maybe I'm thinking in my head 20 and 1 are never going to make an 8. So maybe I jump to 2 and 10. And then maybe I think about it. It has to come out positive. So my bigger number has to be positive. And so I'm going to take that pair of numbers and I'm going to decompose. I've got 4x squared minus 2xy plus 10xy minus 5y squared. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. I like this method because it never changes. It's always the same steps. So out of this first group, I'm going to take a 2x. I'm left with 2x minus y. Out of this group, I can take a 5y. So I'm going to take out a positive 5y. I'm left with 2x minus y. I've done it right because I ended up with that common factor. So I'm going to pull out that common factor of 2x minus 1, and I'm left with 2x plus 5y. And again, if you're ever unsure, please feel free to multiply through and make sure it's the same. One thing I'll say is that if you did forget to greatest common factor, so if you forget to greatest common factor first, you would get this answer. Okay, so if I had gone through and done this question and done AC, which would be horrible, but if I had done these two and multiplied it, I'd get what? -320, I believe. And then you'd have to find two numbers that multiply to give you -320 and add to give you 32. And you would do all that work and you'd end up with this. Okay, and then you would be wrong. You would get 1 mark on a 2-mark question because you've done the AC method factoring. But then what I want you to notice is that this bracket still has a greatest common factor. So if you forget to greatest common factor first, make sure you do it at some point. So at this point, I could pull out that 4, write it out front, and be left with 2x minus y times 2x plus 5y. So that can happen, and it doesn't matter what order you factor in, as long as both the types of factoring get done. So my hint to you is, have it as a mantra in your head, greatest common factor first, and you'll be fine.